Let's Get Two presents
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Here come the Astros, burning with desire. Here come the Astros, breathing orange fire. Here come the Astros, with winning on their mind. Here come the Astros, number one every time. Go, go, Astros!
For the second time in 6 years, the Astros are baseball's best.
And now, Go Go Astros, a web series dedicated to the two-time world champs from H-Town, presented by three guys who remember Bob Knepper.
Good morning, Astros Nation. It is 11:30 at 8:30 in the morning on November 30th.
What time zone are you in, Andy?
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter today. The world is upside down, just like Game 6 was, because I can tell you this. A, we have an interloper. B, I just got called a stat geek on Twitter because I mentioned slashing numbers. And we're going to talk about a first baseman who hasn't played for the Astros and a first baseman who hasn't played for the Astros since 2005 today. With us, as always, is James Christopher, host of Let's Get Two, among other things. Brian Arbor, writer of a wonderful Substack article column, whose name I'm going to forget right now, but he's going to mention it. And then an interloper from somewhere in Missouri, Arkansas.
Missouri, Arkansas.
Just pick it. Yes. It doesn't matter. It's all the same middle flyover blob that we all ignore.
It's the southeast part. It's the southeast part of the country, as termed by the Southeastern Conference.
I mean,
right.
Sure. Go with that. Scott McIntyre, who also is one of the hosts of Yell Fight Suey.
I'm really curious about these slashing numbers. Does that have anything to do with Jason Voorhees?
Not at all.
Wrong show.
Even worse.
Okay.
We used to call it batting average and on-base percentage and slugging.
Okay.
But evidently, if you call them slashing, you're an analytical nerd.
All I know is Scott just gave me an amazing idea for a segment I'll do during Halloween for our movie show. Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
Glad and Andy, welcome to my world, my friend.
Now, to be fair, I did mention total OPS plus because Yordan Alvarez, 33 points higher in total OPS plus when he plays left field, but he's too big and slow to play left field, which was the whole crux of the argument. That's not what we're here talking about today. We are here talking about the fact that Jim is drinking out of a St. Pius cup. No, we are talking today. We are jumping on early. This is not our normal Monday broadcast because we need to talk about, first, Jose Abreu joining the Astros. 3-year deal. Looks like the average annual value is going to be about $19.5 million, so just a hair under 20. We can call it 20 for shits and giggles. We'll start with Jim on this one. What's your view of Abreu taking over the reins from Yuli Gurriel at first base?
Well, I think one of it, I kind of largely agree with what I took from Brian's Substack of it's a win now move. Year 3 is probably not going to be great. Year 1 and 2, I think, make the team better than they were in 2022. I'm trying, and you get me all confused on what year it is now with your time zone issue. Look, I think he's a guy the Astros wanted. I don't know if they overpaid. I don't know how that all worked. I know that it's easy to fall in love with Yuli La Pena, the personality, the numbers he put up in the playoffs. But this guy is, to use it, I'm now going to be a stat nerd. He's mathematically better than Yuli. He makes the team a better team. The question I guess we can get into at some point in the show, whether this episode or later, is are we okay with this and the Montero deal of knowing that year 3 might not be great, but year 1 and 2 might get you another title. So I actually really like the deal, and I'm happy about it.
Brian, how about you?
Yeah, it is an improvement for the team in 2023. Abreu is Abreu is estimated to be worth about 2.5 wins next year among projections. Yuli was negative 0.9 wins above replacement, so it's about a 3-win improvement. You're going to get regression from other places not because the team is bad, but because it's really hard to win 106 games twice, much less once. So they probably won't win 106 games. There'll probably be some regression. This is a hedge against some of that regression for the 2023 team. It adds to the lineup from a hitter who, I detailed this in my article. There's some evidence that he's declining, and there's some evidence that he's not, and you can sort of choose your own adventure on what you want, as national based writers have done. I can show you, they've been an exceedingly negative article and an exceedingly positive article. Pick the one you like best for what you think here. But Jim raises a really sort of important question here about the long term here. And there's a global thought I've had that I've sort of been kicking around in my head this morning, which is this move and the Montero move, signing him for 3 years, an indication by the front office that they're thinking is we have to win, we have to maximize our opportunities in 23 and 24 because we're not sure how it's going to go in 25 or 26. And so it's a win now move, and that makes sense in the context of something sort of global. That's where the franchise is, at this moment and where it may be in the future. On the other hand, I don't have a lot of clarity on that because they don't have sort of a general manager to make these decisions at this moment. And more importantly, the guy who's making that decisions isn't giving interviews to explain his sort of global baseball philosophy on these questions. So something would be nice to hear from Jim Crane in a, that can be done in a really friendly way, as opposed to some of the other questions I have for him.
Yeah, I don't know that Jim Crane is ever going to tell us what his plans are for anything. And even if he did, I would expect him to communicate them poorly.
It's because Jim Crane operates. It's because Jim Crane operates from his other job. Snitches get stitches, and he just doesn't know that when you're covering for the mob, you can't talk, but when you're covering for baseball, you can. And it's not his fault. I mean, we really have to be, I think, sensitive to that.
I mean, we've all seen The Sopranos, right?
Well, no, actually I haven't. But yes, I heard it's good.
You've heard things?
I've heard things.
Look, I live near every Sopranos shooting site. So if you ever want to come up here and see where it ended for Tony, I can show you that you can't actually parallel park where Meadow did. It's illegal.
But is it illegal if you're a Soprano? See, that's the thing.
But don't stop believing, James. You'll see it one day.
Okay.
Maybe not. Scott, what's your view from the outside? I think you're on the show to provide some perspective from the National League, A, and B, from, Arkansas or wherever the hell it is you're from.
Yeah, it's you're friendly this morning. Gee.
He's saucy.
Man, wow. Interloper who's from a state that we'll just make up. First of all, Abreu, I agree with Brian. He may or may not be in a decline. You can't really tell, but he's 35. Guys can still hit when they're 36, 30, into their early 40s and play first base, for crying out loud. A lot of people have done that successfully. So from that perspective, with what Jim Crane's doing, the signing itself is not that big of a deal. From a wider perspective, not having the GM, if you continue signings like this, maybe a concern, but Mr. Crane says the front office is running just fine. And he doesn't miss anybody who used to be the GM there, I believe. So from the outside looking in on that, what you guys have going on is, hey, business as usual. We're still going to keep signing people, even if we don't have a GM. So there's something to be said for that, especially when you're sitting up here in Cardinals Nation wondering when in the world they're going to spend all that excess money they say they have. So, yeah.
That's fair. I think from my point of view, I'm more concerned about – I like the Abreu signing. I don't think the Abreu signing is a bad thing for the Astros at all. Maybe in year 3 we're going to regret having to pay that year 3. But as Brian points out in his article, it's kind of the cost of doing business, because we do know for sure that he received at least one other 3-year offer from Cleveland.
It's been reported since, and the Padres also made him a 3-year offer.
So it's the cost of doing business. If you wanted Jose Abreu on your team, you were going to give him 3 years. Good for him. I'm not worried about the offense, because I think hard hit ball stats being what they are, he has chosen, it appears from watching some games, from reading some White Sox folks that seem to be knowledgeable, he's chosen average and getting on base over power the last couple of years. And I think he even alluded to a little bit of, I think I spoiled some people by averaging 30 home runs for a while. That's not really me anymore. I'll try to hit more if that's what the team needs. But if the team needs to get on base, that's what I'm going to do. And I think that's kind of been his approach. And as a 6-hole hitter for the Houston Astros, okay, that's perfect. Just get on base. Just keep the chain moving.
It also has kind of been, we talked about this during the season, though, but it also fits into how the Astros have changed strategy as a team. I mean, they are a contact, put the ball and play team. They hit a lot of home runs, but they don't rely on them. And so I think it kind of fits in perfectly with what the Astros are trying to do.
Where I am concerned about Jose Abreu is defensively.
There's goatee.
No, the goatee doesn't bother me because I'm a Jeff Bagwell fan, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Put a pin in that. It makes me feel like the 90s are alive again, just like Portland. Also, and I'm a Metallica fan, so back when they were good, that was a thing that, I might try to grow one again for spring training.
Hey guys, I went to college in Southern California, and let me tell you about this new trend called ska. It's going to be huge.
Fantastic.
Hey, but Andy, I'll say the last 2 years, what has been different for Jose Abreu? The last 2 years in Chicago were Tony La Russa years. So Tony La Russa also preaches more contact, that old school type of get on base type of mentality, which it seems that Dusty Baker is also. So if nothing else, Jose Abreu has experience being managed by someone who also wears diapers because of age. So he has that, and he can bring that to the table, and he's going to fit in very well and be able to understand how to take instructions from granddad.
But
this won't be the first time Jose Abreu sits on the bench and says, shouldn't that guy be running for president instead of managing the baseball team?
Oh my God. I was going to, now that makes my joke of how will he listen to a manager who's sober seem so unimpressive because Brian wins.
I'm too drunk to taste the chicken.
One manager has stories about Hank Aaron being at Studio 54 and drinking champagne. Another manager would say, fuck Hank Aaron.
Yeah.
So he's probably moved up in that rank. I am concerned about Abreu real quick defensively. He is not as good a defensive player as Yuli Gurriel was. And there is some thought that our infield defense is one of the differentiators in the Astros play against the league, really for the last 3 or 4 seasons. Now, some of that could be declining age, declining skill, because Abreu is not thought of necessarily as a bad defensive first baseman. He's just kind of there. Some of it could be that he's had to field balls from Tim Anderson for the last several years, and we all know that Tim Anderson is, as a shortstop, a pretty decent hitter. So I think that's the interesting thing to me. I don't love trading offense for defense at defensive positions, but the Astros are a weird team in that they consider first base a defensive position when historically that's where you get your power from. Sure. The Astros don't need power from that position. It's a nice to have, and if he's in the 20 to 25 home run range, I think this is a huge success for the Astros, provided he's not chopping down balls at a 20 error season rate.
And one of the things too, and it's something I'm going to be very interested to hear Brian's take on about a month into 2023 is how the lack of shift affects all of that stuff. So, obviously we'll get into it, but not being able to shift so many guys last year probably helped Yuli out quite a bit as far as his defensive metrics. So it's something I'd be interested. Brian, I'm giving you homework due at the end of April. Let me know.
Well, I think we all held our breath a little bit. Game 5 notwithstanding, and Trey Mancini's great play notwithstanding in Game 5, Trey Mancini at first base looked like kind of a deer that had just learned how to walk whenever he had to back into that bag, as compared to Yuli Gurriel, who, despite what Keith Law says, is a very, very good defensive first baseman, and still a very good defensive first baseman. But speaking of first baseman, the bigger news, I think, coming out of Astros Nation is a guy who retired in 2005 due to shoulder injury. Made the World Series after eliminating the Cardinals and shutting down Old Busch Stadium, so that was good.
For those of you listening, just the podcast, Scott has turned his Cardinal hat around.
And then managed to get himself elected to the Hall of Fame. So maybe knows a little bit about baseball, maybe doesn't know a lot about running a front office, but certainly seems to have a voice. And that's one, Jeffrey Robert Bagwell. I'm going to open with Brian here because I think he has the more passionate take on this. But Mr. Bagwell had was given a chance to interview, was asked questions, did not go seeking, from what I've been told, a chance to voice his opinion on the Astros and the state of Jose Abreu's signing and all that kind of fun stuff. But I think we all perked up initially during the press conference when Jim Crane mentioned that one of the assistant GMs and Jeff Bagwell flew to Miami to help close Jose Abreu for this deal. And it kind of snowballed from there, with Bagwell still trending this morning on my Twitter, at least. Brian, where are we with Jeffrey Robert?
Well, the thing that got the most attention that Bagwell said yesterday was that personally, he said he thought analytics had gone too far. And that's curious for two reasons. One is the team's really succeeded because of analytics. He may, Jim, can you send him the banner behind you? I'll buy you another one if you can let Bagwell know that we won the World Series and have won it twice. With
not even a month ago, people. Calm down.
Yeah. But
25 days.
Yeah. Well, who's trying to change stuff, right? Is most teams don't celebrate their security in sort of curious way. And the second is because Jeff Bagwell's not giving this when he says personally, this isn't when he goes on the broadcast every once in a while and tells a bunch of old stories. This isn't, he goes to some card show and Mark Berman shows up to interview him. And this is Jeff Bagwell, who has, I think officially he's a community outreach executive, and unofficially he definitely has the ear of Jim Crane, right? He's not nobody, right? When it comes to the decision-making process of the Astros, it's not unusual that he went to recruit Jose Abreu. Hey, you send a player, you send a guy, you send a fellow enthusiast for oddly haired goatees. So they bonded over that. Not a fan of the hair tie around Abreu's goatee. That's I think his weakest point. But again, no one should trust my fashion instincts. So that part isn't big or unusual, or I think something different than we'd have seen 5 years ago, or frankly, even 20 years ago. The real question is this type of thinking representing a change in the organization's thought and the organization's philosophy? We don't really know the answer to that fully, but there's a lot of sort of drip that, they're moving away from some of the stuff that worked. And frankly, they're moving away from what I think is, one of the things that, Jeff Luna in particular was sort of interested in is what's always the next frontier? How do we get to the next thing? How do we continue not to, if we stand still, we fall behind.
Sure.
And so is that the case? I don't know. Right. And we know there'll be a GM that was clearly stated yesterday by Jim Crane. There'll be a GM by opening day. But what that sort of represents is, it's something we're going to continue to have to look at the tea leaves on and what it means for the team going forward.
Jim,
Okay.
Where are you on this?
So I've got a couple of different things, and I think Brian is right. Like, we're reading tea leaves. We're having to interpret. Jim Crane doesn't care how we feel. If he did, he would be more open with his explanations. I do think it's weird because I actually have become less concerned about the story than I was about it in September. Remember when I wanted to bring it up and you guys were like, who cares? We're in the playoffs. Here's a couple things. One of the things that I think is interesting about this offseason so far, and I think it goes more to how the Click Crane thing wasn't working. For 2 off seasons, Crane had said, I have money and I'm going to spend it. And then he didn't spend it. And I think all of us thought, okay, he's just talking to us but yet not spending the money. Now I think it's clear, or this is indication that he wanted to spend the money and his GM didn't. And so because he's out here spending money. I think the other part of it is I share Brian's ultimate concern if Bagwell becomes really, really huge in player acquisition, player development, whatever. However, until we see the actual evidence that that's happening, we talk on the show all the time that Astros Twitter is a little nuts. So I'm not going to get nuts with Astros Twitter just because they're nuts. I'm going to wait to see if something happens before I react. I think it's completely fair for Bagwell to be used as a guy who can connect with a player and say, this is what the clubhouse is like, because he's still close to the guys, all of that stuff. I share Brian. I don't want to take a step backward to being get back on analytics, but I think adding a human level to the analytics maybe isn't the worst thing. Maybe that is the next evolution in it all, right? But so I'm in a very much a wait and see mode. But if it turns out, I think as Brian's worst fear, then I share his concern completely and do worry about the future of the team. I mean, how many times have we seen a player go back to his alma mater team in some other capacity and do well? The fact is, Don Mattingly is now the bench coach in Toronto. So it doesn't happen very often. So that's obviously history against it. But I think if it turns out the way Brian thinks, and I obviously share that same concern.
Scott, you come from an organization where you have a front office executive who is serving federal prison time still. So you've seen some turmoil. That's the last one, I promise.
Scott, did you know he signed up for abuse this morning? Because I didn't.
No, but I sign up every morning for that. I wake up.
Okay, Scott, on Friday we can talk.
I'm going to see Jim. I'm going to see Jim and Andy today. Let's see what kind of backwoods,
I apologize. It really is the last dig that I had planned.
Scott, we're recording in 2 days. We can talk bowl projections.
We can. I'll have nothing to say.
Sure you do. What salad bowl are you going to use during this winter's holiday festivities?
Let's use Tidy Bowl.
But this is here. Let's put things in perspective, okay? And that's what I'm here. I'm here all together. I am the guy that brings the perspective. It's not uncommon for players to be involved in the front office. If you look around the Cardinals, Jason Isringhausen's around, Ozzie Smith is around, Jose Oquendo, just like he was on the baseball field, is a plug and play wherever they need him in the organization. There's a lot of guys that have the ear of the front office staff. It's also not uncommon to other teams in baseball. It's not uncommon in other sports. Jim and I have drawn the similarities between the hockey organizational structures and baseball organizational structures as well. And it is completely just flooded in hockey from your front office to your GM. These are, it's throughout the league that there are great players that are in these positions. And I would ask Astros fans, if you don't want Jeff Bagwell in Jim Crane's ear, who do you want? Hakeem Olajuwon? I don't think he knows anything about the Astros. So having Bagwell there is a real good thing. The data itself, the analytics, we live in an analytical age, and anyone who ignores the analytics is going to be left behind. But at the same time, it's the interpretation of that data that is more important than the data itself. And furthermore, the human element, which is exactly what Jim was just mentioning, that is the next evolution of analytics, because there are intangibles to every human being that you can't see. And it's not like Jeff Bagwell and Jim Crane just became friends, right? These guys have been friends for a long time. So I think that people are in a panic, not having a GM and having Jeff Bagwell and Jim Crane's ear so publicly, but it's probably okay. You're probably going to be okay. And it also means that your GM is going to have to fit that line of thinking while also fitting in with the analytics if they want to be able to compete.
So I want to push back a little bit on the notion that sort of human stuff is the next part of analytics, because one of the things that I learned most from reading Astro Ball, Ben Ryder's book about the Astros development into the first World Championship team, is how much they were trying to take into account human factors, but part of them being analytics is they were trying to model the human factors, and because it matters. Well, one thing they had, and one of the Astro scouts was the son of the then LSU athletic director. So let me know. Yeah, Bagwell Biggio had Bregman. The new killer bee.
Berkman.
Barry. We're going to talk about Kevin Bass.
Kevin Bass and Glenn Davis both had the keys to the LSU indoor baseball facility, which some nights his teammates would be out partying like Aaron Nola, and Bregman would be in taking batting practice. That sort of he had this internal drive to maximize what he was doing, and that was a key factor in drafting him. But of course, baseball talent really matters too.
Well, one of the things too, Brian, I think
clubhouse people, and they don't have the baseball talent. And by the way, he's a great clubhouse guy.
One of the things to your point, Brian, the Astros are sort of famous for digesting this information and giving the players what they want. Not necessarily everybody gets the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so Part of me wonders, and maybe this is my own bias, but would y'all feel better about if it were Biggio giving advice? Because
Okay.
I kind of would, Andy.
So Biggio did give advice. It's not fairly, I mean, I don't know how well known it is, but it's known to me because I've been told by people who work for the Astros that this is true, that Luhnow leaned on Biggio a lot for personnel decisions. Biggio was not the final word on those, and they certainly used analytics a lot to determine who they were going to pursue, who they weren't going to pursue, who was worth what dollar amount, all of that. But there was a lot that Luhnow went to Craig Biggio and said, hey, is this guy going to fit in what the Astros are trying to do? The same way they went to AJ Hinch and said, hey, is this a guy that you want to manage, want to deal with? And I think one of the things Luhnow's front office did is they got away from that a little bit because there was nobody really thrilled about taking a spousal abuser from Toronto at the end of the day. But those players,
except for Taubman, he liked it.
He was so happy that he lost his job over it, which leads me back to Jeff Bagwell. Jeff Bagwell didn't just start talking to Jim Crane in 2022 after the All-Star break when they were starting to talk about moves. Jeff Bagwell has literally been in Jim Crane's ear, sitting in his seats, talking to him since Crane bought the team, and certainly since 2017 when Bagwell, as he said yesterday, turned his life around, got out of whatever personal mess he was in. If you live in Houston, you know what that personal mess probably was. We don't need to get into that. But all of the moves, all of the signings, Bagwell's been asked about. So this isn't new. And the fact that the team has continued to lean on analytics heavily hasn't changed. Where I think Bagwell, and he did couch every one of his things, although I don't think it showed up as quotes. Personally, I believe, because personally, he was the kind of hitter that didn't want a bunch of stats, didn't want to know what the pitcher was trying to do, wanted to feel the game. Having said all that, Yordan Alvarez still dived for an iPad before and after every at-bat because that's how he grew up in the Astros organization. So they're not. I just don't see them getting away from it because Jeff Bagwell gave a press conference. And it wasn't really him even giving a press conference. It was Mark Berman asking him questions.
Right.
And a bunch of other people stuck microphones in the crowd because they got some good sound bites out of it. I would agree that on a couple things Brian said. If this moves in the area where we're signing Jim Bowden to be the GM, yes, I would be horrified. If we get an old school guy that has no analytical background and we start shedding people out of the front office who are very key to that, yeah, it'll be bad, and we'll know that fairly quickly. I think January seems to be the date. But I tend to think it's going to be more of a blend of we've got all this data, and then we're going to figure out what we want to do with it. One of the issues that Click ran into, and I think this is becoming more well-known, he didn't want Jeremy Pena batting second, and that's why Jeremy Pena didn't bat second for a very long time. And when you talk about Bagwell saying things like the analytics got out of hand, that's the kind of thing he was talking about, is Click was trying to take those decisions out of Dusty Baker's hand. One of the things Luhnow and Hinch did very well is Luhnow knew where the line was as far as what AJ Hinch was responsible for. So I think in 2017, before we knew everything that we knew, Hinch was given a lot of credit for bringing the human element, the thing we're talking about today, into the analytical world, knowing when players need to be pushed, knowing when they need to be backed off on, knowing what levers to pull. That's what Hinch did as a good manager because he brought the human element into this analytical world. I think that you're going to see something backwards on that where the GM, whoever comes in, is going to have a strong statistical background, strong analytical background, is probably going to come from one of these organizations that we admire, like the Dodgers, like the Rays, maybe not the Rays at this point, but is going to come in and it will continue to be a blend. I think another excellent point that Brian made, though, is we're going to do everything we can to win before 2025, because at that point we have Yordan Alvarez under contract, and that's about it. You're going to have a couple of those pitchers left, but Altuve's contract is up. Bregman's contract is up.
They're both up in 2024.
Yeah, Jose in the time frame. Jose Abreu's contract, and I'm not worried about Altuve because I think he's one of the guys they're just going to write a check for however long he wants to be there.
Right.
But you've got some real decisions to make about how you want to continue to proceed. So I think we are in win now mode.
I want to ask something kind of like, and I want to have Scott weigh in on this too. But before I do that, the statement of in 2017, did any of us thought we would be complaining about a window that's going to close 8 years later, or at least have to be I mean, let's stop and put some stuff in perspective. That's where we are. How much of this is that sort of natural lack of self-esteem we have as Astros fans? And Andy, you remember when we used to talk about this during the pandemic? We talked about it all the time. And finally, one of our good friends who's a Yankee fan texted us and was like, no, after listening to you guys, I totally get it. The Astros deserve to feel the way they feel about MLB. You remember all that? Yeah. How much of it is there is the fear of the other big owner in the state of Texas and how he does business versus any kind of indication that we think we're going to go that direction, we just sort of freak out? I mean, part of me, we can explain all this is normal, but then I also think, well, Jerry Jones sent Troy Aikman everywhere. I was like, well, don't want to use him as an example. Andy, I guess.
I think it's a reinforced point when you start looking for information out of the national media. Keith Law wrote an article for The Athletic before the Bagwell stuff about Jose Abreu and the signing, and about how he was just apoplectic, because this is the kind of deal that somebody who wants to be Jerry Jones would make, and it's reminiscent of 80s Steinbrenner signing a 35-year-old first baseman to a 3-year deal with no regard for any of the variables that happened and the why you have to sign him for 3 years and what he would mean for the Astros and how many more wins he could potentially bring. None of that. It was just, this is a bad deal because I don't like Jim Crane and he's trying to be Jerry Jones. And so that narrative has started to take hold.
Andy, that article says, I don't like this signing because it's an old guy. And it's basically. And so that is, and he says, you should, and one of the points he made is, to your point, right, is that this is a first base is a position where you don't have to put your resources there. I don't agree with that. That's not what I wrote here, right? But it is not a thing I'm going to dismiss entirely just because it says something negative or because he's unhappy about them getting rid of James Click. There are reasons to read that article and reasons to pay attention to that, even if I don't agree with that. If you want the completely other perspective from a national writer, you can read Ben Clemens at Fangraph, who the headline for that is the Jose Abreu is signing fits the Astros like a glove. It is completely positive in that. And again, I read both, and I recommend everyone sort of read both because both of those places, a lot of stuff come down in between on that.
But my point, Brian, from a psyche standpoint, which is what Jim was asking about, is yes, that absolutely feeds into this idea that we have this thing is very precious that's going to go away really quickly because something bad's going to happen or it's going to be taken from us. So sure, there's part of my brain that always is going to feed into that. And whether that's, I don't think it's in 23, but if it's in 24 or after 24 or in 25, or we don't sign Kyle Tucker to a longer-term deal, which maybe we're not going to do, if we don't lock down a few of these pitchers that we have that are really cheap now, there's some things that could really go bad for the Astros fairly quickly, and fairly quickly being 2-3 seasons from now. But that's always in the back of the head, and I think that's in every baseball fan's in the back of their head, unless you're a Yankee or Dodgers fan, where you don't really have to deal with that. But to Scott's point, I think part of the reason he's here is that the whole deal when Jim Crane bought this team, regardless of analytics, regardless of the human aspect, we were going to model our organization after the Cardinals. We were going to spend money where we had to. We were going to develop players. I think there's a hiccup in that developing players when you lose 2 first-round and 2 second-round draft picks as a penalty. Oh, I'm sorry, the penalty we didn't get for the sign deal. Didn't have a penalty. But it's to be consistently competitive. I don't see Jeff Bagwell being an impediment to that, and I don't see the Jose Abreu signing being impediment to that as long as we continue to develop guys. I think one of the holes in the Astros organization is they have nobody who they could rely on to effectively play first base coming out of AAA. So if you want to be Keith Law and not assign value or monetary value to first base, you have to have somebody in AAA or AA who's ready to take those reins. We don't.
Well, I mean, and you got to take a look at this too. It's not like you guys have gotten some pedestrian first baseman who, this isn't Moneyball where we have to suddenly teach the guy how to play first base.
Scott, it's not hard.
Incredibly easy.
You put your foot on your bag and you reach out and you catch the ball. It's that simple, right? Now, you have a guy who is perennially in the top 20 of all-star voting, for crying out loud. Now, so it's not like Jose Abreu is chopped liver. He's nowhere near that. He's an exceptionally good first baseman and has been for an extended amount of time. And there is still a window here at the end of his career. To your point, Andy, if you don't have somebody in the minors to take over, you've got to bring somebody in. So what if it's a 3-year deal? I also understand Houston Astros sports fans. It's not too long ago that you guys were lost in the wilderness, losing 100 games until this run started. But now you're in this run. And the thing is, if you're modeling this off the Cardinals organization, you're doing it a little bit better than us right now because you're winning and we're struggling to get into the postseason. So in that perspective, if you look at it in that perspective, the Abreu signing is fine. Bagwell being attached to the GM is okay if other things fall in place the way they should. But you've got to look around at the Texas professional sports situation right now too. You guys are, the Cowboys are having a good year this year, but other than that, you guys are it as far as championships go now that the Spurs run has kind of ended. So from a professional sports fan perspective in the state of Texas, yeah, I'm probably a little nervous because the Astros are the only thing I got going, and fingers crossed that this doesn't all fall apart and that Jim Crane doesn't turn into, Mr. Meddling and screws everything up. But you won a World Series this year with a completely dysfunctional relationship between your GM and coach and owner. Think about that. Complete just chaos is from what it sounds like it was between Click and Crane. It sounds like they couldn't get on the same page. They couldn't figure out where to go to dinner together, for crying out loud. What are we going to have? You want the fish, honey? No, I'm not a pescatarian. You won a World Series in that situation, and now you're getting into a situation where your new GM can fit the owner's mindset, and the owner is calling in his all-star player best friend to help that come about. That doesn't sound stupid to me.
And I think too, one of the things Brian talked about was that we just mentioned the run being over, and I take Jim Crane at his word that we're never going to see 100 lost seasons again. I don't think that's going to happen. But let's say we take a couple year dip like the Giants did between their appearances, I would trade that for one more World Series for sure. If you could tell me tomorrow, you might not make the playoffs in 25, but you'll win 23 or 24, I'd take it right now.
Circumstances being what they were, that's what happened in 2020. It was. We were a sub 500 team. Some of that was by design because of the stupid playoff system that Major League Baseball put in place in the COVID season. But that was not a team that was playing well and was not healthy and had some holes that they were able to flip a switch once the playoffs started. A lot of that had to do with playing the A's and them just being rancid. But that's a different topic for a different day. We probably need to get to the point of wrapping up here. So, Brian, any final thoughts on next steps for the Astros?
They have a hole in the outfield. And so I think there are two major things to look at. Are they going to re-sign Justin Verlander? And based on this contract, to do that would require them to go over the competitive balance threshold, which should be easy for the general manager to get approval from the owner to do if he wants it.
He actually said, Crane actually said yesterday that we can go up to and we can go over if we need to. That's not a concern this year.
Yeah. And again, is that, something will happen or cheap talk? Could be either one. Again, tea leaves to read. You can read that either way you want. The one sort of, it's not pressing, but they are connected to a number of potential people for the outfield. I'm real skeptical of the Wilson Contreras rumors, but that they may want to get someone. They also have between Chas McCormick and Jake Myers, they can cover it if necessary. Now, maybe Pedro Leon is ready, though he didn't have a great year in AAA. They can play David Hensley out there some as well. So it's not critical and pressing, but would be nice to have a good left-handed bat in left field.
Jim?
Look, I think part of why we wanted to do this was to talk about the knee-jerk reaction of Astros Twitter. And I think we've just shown that we can all have different opinions on this and be completely sane in our different opinions. I absolutely get that this can go sideways real quick. If they name Brad Ausmus as the GM, I'm assuming with Brian writing
to be the GM.
No, I know, but this is the Astros Twitter rumor knee-jerk reaction of the minute. I think it's gonna. I think what might happen is what I predicted last week, where I think you'll see a Luhnow lieutenant when one becomes available, brought back into this role. So, look, I just don't think it's worth worrying about it until there's something to worry about, and just keep enjoying that.
Maybe they'll call in Art Howe.
Scott, I don't want to close out with you talking about the Astros. So what do the Cardinals have going on? Just real briefly, like the 30-second, what do they need? What are they doing?
Pocketbooks are open. Pocketbooks are open, and I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but we also have a catcher to replace. We kind of had a guy that, it's kind of been nice for when you look at your lineup and like for 20 years, you just pencil one guy's name in. That makes it really easy. He's gone now, but we do have the reigning MVP at first base and Paul Goldschmidt. Thought I'd throw that in there. Thank you. And the runner-up in third base and Nolan Arenado. For the Cardinals, the corners are in place. It's just a matter of will they put the correct pieces together in this ballpark that's turned into an incredibly favorable to the pitchers ballpark. Balls don't fly out of bush like they used to. Buildings in the outfield blocking the airflow from the Mississippi. We can go through to all this, but the Cardinals have to find a team that or have to put players on the field that can hit for power, but gap power more than home run power, and learn how to play like that. They say the pockets are open, but we'll see. You're signing players, and we're not. So,
Scott, I have a different Cardinals question for you. Okay. And
Sure.
It's based on a different sort of premise here. There's an important woman in my profession. She's actually a University of Arkansas graduate named Sunshine Hilligus.
She sounds brilliant.
And A, she is. And B, I knew I was, I'd gotten used to her name when I could say it and not laugh at it. So how's it going with having Lars Nootbaar being one of the key members of your outfield?
Lars Nootbaar is one of the happiest players that you will ever experience on the field. He is total trade bait right now. And I hate to see that because he's such an infectious kid. He's like 22 years old and he's just grinning and just loving the fact that he's there. And his name is Nootbaar. There's nothing like listening to 40,000 people go Noot when he comes up to the plate. That's fantastic.
And I'm happy to hear he's trade bait because Jeff Bagwell, if you're listening, here's an idea for you.
Yeah, I mean, if you want a 220 hitter that can only play about half a season without being injured or sent down to AAA, he's your guy.
I mean, we're planning on re-signing Michael Brantley at some point, so maybe that's what we're doing now. All right.
The other half of the
I
season,
would
Michael Brantley doesn't.
I would tell all the Astros brethren, calm down. It's not even December yet. Settle down. It's going to be okay. You're griping about this because you just won a World Series and you don't have anything else to talk about right now. Go focus on the turkey and the ham because you're going to have to do it all over again coming up at Christmas. Settle down. Let things shake out. You guys are going to be okay. You're at the top of the mountain right now. So when people are at the top of the mountain, there's nowhere else to climb up. They're just defending from below. And fans are nervous about that, but they shouldn't be. Enjoy the ring. Nobody can take this one away from you. Nobody's going to. No, nobody can beat their chest and say, "Well, they had buzzers strapped to the back of their necks," and blah, blah, blah. You can't do that this time, guys. They can't do that. They cannot. This was the one that they cannot take away from you. And Astros fans should enjoy the moment and not try to take the joy away from themselves.
That's a great way to put it.
I think on that note, I live in a world where Jeff Bagwell thinks that analytics are fine for pitchers, but not for hitters. And that's where we are. So for Jim, for Brian, and for our special guest, Scott.
Team Texas.
You're making me do it again. This has been Go Astros. We will join you sometime after the winter meetings with, the next time we sign Brandon Nimmo.
I think the next show is actually going to be the day of the winter meeting. So I want to talk about how they work since I've been. And then we'll figure it out after there.
Well, that sounds special. Until then, guys, go Astros.